Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing The Death of Vivek Oji. The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi is a novel that examines gender identity and cultural norms. In some ways, it's a murder mystery where you as the reader have limited information about who or what killed Oji. As the story unfolds, we learn about Oji and how the family and friends around him navigate him being different, and also the circumstances that lead to his death. The Death of Vivek Oji begins with the story of his parents and how they met. His father, Chika, is a young bachelor who journeys home shortly after his older brother's marriage to a woman named Mary. In his journey home, he visits his mother and spends a little bit of time with her, but comes into contact with his sister-in-law, Mary. She's described as being a rather beautiful woman in whom his brother takes deep pride and loves dearly. The two of them are very much in love. Chika is unmarried at this time and himself not in a relationship. He's a bachelor, living on his own, and seeing the love between his sister-in-law and brother, it causes him to feel a certain sense of loneliness within his own home and within his own life. So when visiting his family, he grows to be quite close with his sister-in-law. In part, it's due to his loneliness, but also, unfortunately, he begins to develop an attraction to her. It's something that his mother picks up on, as she's quite aware and intuitive. And things come to a head one day when he oversteps his boundaries. I don't think it was so much a physical attraction thing or even him being attracted, but more so him being lonely, seeing his brother's relationship and wanting something like that for himself. Unfortunately, this leads to a period of distance with the sister-in-law, but the incident is never repeated, and shortly thereafter, he meets a young woman who's moved to town with her uncle from India following the death of her father. Her name is Kavita. The two fall in love and they end up getting married after courtship. So it's like you have the blending of these two cultures. Initially, there's a clash at the time of the wedding because in Indian culture, the bride's family typically pays the bride price in the form of a dowry. Whereas in Chika's culture, the husband's family pays the bride price. So with these two sides battling over whose tradition is going to reign supreme, it's finally settled on like the bride prices, the dowry and whatnot, that pretty much they cancel each other out. So instead of the dowry, which consists of a collection of jewelry that had been handed down from her mother's family through the generations of women, that would then be given to whatever children the marriage produces instead, right? Instead of being used as the dowry. And so they settle into a comfortable relationship with each other. Chika being quite handsome, he's a physically attractive man, and Kavita, who's also described as being pretty, the two of them produce the very beautiful child Vivek. And it's known from the beginning of the book that Vivek actually dies. The author points back to this very early on in the book, but not giving you any details about what has happened, right? They're like these little flashbacks. It's like with the funeral. People are thinking back on moments from his life and wishing that they could go back to those moments in the past that are now burned in their memory. His mother injures her foot very early in the book, stepping on, I think it was like a stick or a tool or something like that on their property. And it's nothing major at the time. She goes to the doctor, gets it taken care of, but it leaves a very peculiar scar on her foot, which the family comes to know and recognize. And when Vivek is born, shortly after he's born, a similar scar suddenly appears on his foot. It builds up a sense of foreboding with Chika that something's wrong, but he tries to dismiss this from his mind. Yet there's this like constant gnawing feeling that he can't quite get rid of. Shortly thereafter, he receives notice that his mother's died, and the family is distraught at the loss. As through time, Chico's mother had two sons. Those were all the children she had, but her sons marrying two women, she became very close to them, and she basically gained two daughters. And with their mother's loss, it was really felt acutely by both the sons and their wives. Kavita, she'd lost both her mother and father. And in meeting Chika's mother, it wasn't a replacement, but it kind of helped to kind of fill that void. In Chika's mother, she kind of found the mother that she didn't have in her own childhood, which she missed dearly. Her mother died first and died when she was quite younger. In this woman, she kind of found a surrogate mother. And to then have her end up passing away as well, just at the moment that this baby's coming into the world, it's like what should have been a joyous occasion ends up being somewhat overshadowed by this sad moment, the passing of Chika's mother. It seemed that like this scar on Vivek's foot is like a connection between him and his grandmother, right? It develops this kind of heavy feeling within Chika. Their mother had this scar on her foot. And Vivek being born with the similar scar in the same spot and whatnot, and then the mother dying, it feels like a bad premonition. So Chika has a child, and his brother and his wife have a child, Sita, a boy who's about a year older than Vivek. The two are close in age, and so with them growing up together, being boys and things like that, they grew up to be quite close, more like brothers than just cousins, especially because they're both only children. And so through Sita, we see like their childhoods developing at the same time. So they attend a kid's party, or at least Vivek's mother attends. It's like this group of women who aren't Nigerian, but rather married to Nigerian men, and for whatever reason are living in the country. So it's like an immigrant group, if you think of it. It helps them to adapt to life in Nigeria. They throw parties and things like that. And through this gathering, the kids get to know each other. They spend a lot of time together at these parties as rather young children. As they get older, school age and into high school, and they then begin to develop little crushes on each other, puppy love relationships. But it's during this period that Osita begins to spend more time in his uncle's house with Vivek, because it's quite different from his household. Initially, Mary and Chika's brother had a happy marriage. The two were very much in love, but things have happened over time. She's had a few miscarriages, and has turned to religion. She's become like a fervently religious individual. And because of this very strict household, it's cold. Both Osita and his father spend as little time as possible within the house, which is something that Mary then comes to notice and feels a kind of way about it, right? Not realizing that her harsh demeanor and her fervent religiosity is the reason that the two of them is staying away. Like, she's basically pushing them away. She accuses her husband of having an affair. She fusses at her son for being away from the house and spending so much time in his uncle's house, where instead of trying to make the house a bit more welcoming, which might make them want to spend more time at home, she just digs in and does the opposite of what she probably should. But as Osita gets older, he develops a crush on a girl from the neighborhood who attends these like little get-togethers. And with that, he has like a cute relationship with her. They become boyfriend and girlfriend. They share some early experiences together. And it kind of feels like Vivek is on the outside looking in. From a rather young age, the other kids regard him as being weird, right? Because he comes across as being different from the other kids. Part of this is that he just moves differently, as well as he has what's described as like these blackouts. Not just a matter of zoning out as in being distracted, but actually like blacking out at times. And it's something that Osita, because basically they live together. They share a house when Osita stays over. There's like a little shack at the back of the house, right? Which is like a area for the boys. And that's where they spend their time. That's where Vivek lives. And so when Osita is visiting, they stay in close contact in this small space. And so it's like the adults aren't aware, right, that something is going on with Vivek, that he might be anemic or he's not getting enough nutrition or something like that. And it's something that they keep hidden from them. Osita keeping this secret, they fail to realize how potentially serious this might be. You know, he's having these blackouts where, it's like the other kids just pick up on him being different. They used to fight when they were younger, but as they get older, they've stopped fighting. There's quite a bit of machismo amongst the kids, right? Especially as they become young men. But Vivek is skinny. He looks kind of frail. He's quiet in comparison to the other kids, which kind of marks him for attempted bullying. When him and Osita fought when they were kids, like they fought when they were kids, but now that they're older, the two of them have stopped fighting, at least fighting each other. But Vivek continues to fight kids from the neighborhood because they try to pick on him. And it turns out that, never mind his appearance, he's actually a ferocious fighter. It's very unexpected, as looking at him, you wouldn't think that he'd be able to hold his own. Osita used to jump in and break up the fights when he saw them, right? Until one day he really saw that like Vivek was giving some older kid the business, right? And realized that he could hold his own, that he could take care of himself. Vivek keeps having these blackouts. It's something he can't really control. He's in denial about. And there's definitely some cause for concern. But Osita, being a young man and wanting to fit in and have an interest in girls and things like that, it's like he doesn't necessarily have the tools to help Vivek deal with or recognize how serious this issue is. So while he keeps Vivek's secret from the adults, he also kind of casts him aside when it gets in the way of the things that he wants to do, and him being a young man and having experiences that young men would want to have at that age. Like, Vivek isn't interested in these things. As Osita and Vivek get older, they unfortunately drift apart. By the time they reach their early 20s, they barely see each other. Part of this is a result of them going to different schools and being about a year apart. Originally, the plan was for Vivek to attend college in America, but as he enters his late teens, or by the time he reaches his late teens, these little episodes and moments that he was having early in his youth have become more serious and noticeable to the people around him. So whereas before he was just having these blackouts and he was able to hide them, by the time he reaches his late teens, early 20s, it's become too serious. It's become apparent that something's off about him. Not just that he's different, but also he seems to have, he's struggling a bit with depression and things like that. When he was younger, he would shave his hair, cut his hair. But as he gets older, he keeps his hair long and doesn't cut it anymore. It grows quite long, which in and of itself isn't the issue. But his parents notice that he's not eating. He looks like he's losing weight. He's slim. He's described as being skinny, but is becoming increasingly frail and weak looking. He basically looks like he's wasting away. As a youth, part of what brought some distance between him, or initiated this distance between him and Osita, is that Vivek was sent to a boarding school, like a military school. They felt that he was a little soft and needed some toughening up. And so with the other kids bullying him, they saw something in him too. The other kids picked up on it too, right? Some kids can be a little different, and any kind of difference as small kids, depending on how children are being raised, can result in bullying. And so Osita used to pick up for Vivek, but now as he's getting older, his parents start to become more concerned, right? So Vivek's father decides that he needs some toughening up and sends him off to this military boarding school. But by the time he comes back and is supposed to go off to college, the idea of him going away to college in America has fallen by the wayside, as it also does for Osita, because he doesn't really have any interest in going abroad. Him and his mother, it's not really clear if it's a financial thing, but neither one of them has a real interest in him going abroad. It's always been viewed by them as like a fancy, right? Something more reasonable for her, that because her mother had this jewelry, the jewelry had been set aside where she could sell it when it was time for Vivek to go off to college. So, but it's like with his depression and the other things he has going on, it doesn't seem like a good idea for him to be away. So both of the kids end up going to school locally. They seem to be doing okay. Vivek is living, Osita's living the two of them are living like typical young men. Vivek comes back from school because yet still there's something wrong with him. It's not just a matter of him growing up, but his demeanor, his behavior just seems very divorced from everything that's going on around him. So his father ends up having to go and bring him home from the school. It's described as him basically having a nervous breakdown. His parents are kind of at their wits' end with regards to what to do and how to deal with this situation. His mother is incredibly concerned, and she does everything she can. She spends all of her waking time trying to think about what she can do to help Vivek get better. His father is also concerned, but maybe less so than the mom. And it ends up bringing a bit of distance in their marriage, as his father feels a little bit neglected by the mom. But here again, there's this thing of lack of communication and talking between husband and wife. Vivek's mother kind of guesses at what's going on and tries to figure things out, tries to help him get better. But I don't recall any point in time where she actually sits down with Vivek and talks to him, tries to ask him what's going on. And the same thing with his father. And the dad begins to feel a bit neglected in the marriage, but at no point in time does he sit down and speak to his wife about it, explain to her that he also needs care and attention, that in addition to their son, they still have to maintain their relationship and they can't become completely consumed with him. It's fine. They should be concerned about Vivek. They should try to help him to figure things out, but they still have to maintain their romantic relationship as well. They have to give time to their marriage. They can't just assume that things will take care of itself as they get older, right? It seems like there was an inkling when he was young, but it seems like no one really wanted to admit to themselves that Vivek might possibly be gay. It's something that's pointed out, whereas he gets older, he starts growing out his hair and it becomes quite long. And because of his very slim body type, from a distance, he can look a little bit feminine. He doesn't have the size and stature of a lot of the young men around him. He's very slim. And with his long hair, at first glance, people, especially if they don't know him very well, if they see him from some distance away, they might assume that he's a female. And so with that comes cause for concern, because during this time, there's fear that violence might be on the horizon with regards to politics. And so his family members and loved ones begin to fear for Vivek, because the concern is that under normal circumstances, despite him having grown up in this community, people knowing him and all of that, all it takes is for the wrong person to see him and mistake him for a female, or to assume that he's gay, or to make some other inference about him, and they might react violently. His mother hasn't really come to terms or discussed it with him, or even really allowed the idea into her own mind that he might be gay. And so with that, she's kind of dismissive when this is pointed out to her by her sister-in-law. Mary suggests that instead of taking him to the doctor, him praying and going to church, that they could try to figure things out that way. So Mary, which is the sister-in-law, suggests that he comes to her church, because her church knows how to deal with these kinds of things. And unfortunately, his experience ends up driving a wedge between the family, because Mary's church, their solution to dealing with what they deem as the problem of being gay, is to attempt to perform an exorcism. And so it's like this unspoken thing early in the book where, sure, it seems like Vivek has some depression going on, but there's like a mental health thing there as well. And some of it might be a result of him struggling with his sexual identity, his identity overall, feeling isolated from everyone else around him, not knowing how to deal with this feeling. So he has to kind of hide this side of himself away. He can't really speak about what's going on with him. And so even when people ask, when his mother and other family members ask, they don't truly want the real answer as to what's going on. They'd rather infer and kind of speak around his feelings and his issues than to deal with them head on, which likely, probably gives him the sense that they're kind of ignoring it, making excuses to not deal with it. It more likely makes him feel that he won't be accepted. Everyone's trying to figure out the problem of what's happening to him, but no one's actually talking to him about it. His mother was well-intentioned, but she's a little bit in denial, a bit delusional about what's going on. And the first person that reaches out to him and somewhat calls what's going on with him by its name, which is him being gay, it's the first time that someone acknowledges it and he feels seen. It's like, with this being his aunt, he trusts her. It's coming from a place of love. Her solution is misguided, right? Because she takes him to her church with the intention of trying to help him, but their solution is to perform an exorcism, basically attempt to it's like if you think of these conversion camps, people sometimes attend. Her method for solving this issue, for taking care of what they view as his problem, is along those lines. To take him to this very fervently religious church where they attempt to essentially beat the gay out of him. So here it is, this woman who has loved him since he was a child, and he's loved since he was a child, he grew up with her, basically being like a second mother, takes him to this church where the preacher and the congregation turn on him and beat him. And so it's an incredibly traumatic experience for him. It drives a wedge between Mary's relationship with Kavita, because while she asked him to go, she thought it would be helpful for him to go to this church. She didn't understand what exactly this so-called deliverance program was about. And Mary took her son and encouraged him to, go to the church to see if they could help him. And instead of helping him, they actually hurt him. So there's hurt in the physical sense, but then also the emotional hurt of this woman who's been a major figure in his life up to this point, doing this terrible thing to him, or allowing this terrible thing to be done to him. And so it's just incredibly devastating to him and incredibly emotionally upsetting. He's had these experiences even while he was away at boarding school. And Osita notices, they share this room, and he notices Vivek has these weird circular marks on his body. Vivek confesses to actually, in passing, explains to Osita that the marks on his body are actually cigarette burns that he got while at the boarding school. And basically, he's been quietly dealing with being tortured by people for being different. The first time it happened, students at school, not to say it makes it better, those were like kids at school who, being immature and misguided, but essentially strangers to him. But here it is that you have this person that claims to love him, this person that he has loved, who now allows people to torture and abuse him because of their misguided belief that he's possessed by a devil. What would that say about how a person feels about you? You know, I mean, who believes in demons in this day, right? But then also, secondly, within recent times, who believes in demons and tries to beat them out of a person? You know, like, how on earth would you think that's a good idea? So he's already feeling isolated and ostracized from the rest of the world. But then turns out that he also can't turn to his family, because the reality is he can't trust them either. At least it seems that way, right? Given his experience with his aunt, it's like, if you can't speak to friends about it, if you can't speak to your family about it, who can you talk to? And even when Osita starts to suspect that Vivek might be gay, Osita rejects him as well and says some rather unkind things to him. So here's this person who's been like a brother to him, has been his best friend throughout their childhood, and he's rejected by him once, you know, it's pretty much accepted that he's gay. His mom is in denial. She hasn't admitted to herself that Vivek is gay because she doesn't want to have to like cast him aside. She doesn't turn away from him. Right? By chance, some girls that Vivek and Osita were friends with, when as part of like this Nigerian immigrant group, you know, they reconnect. And they're the first people to really make an effort to, instead of just assuming that they know what's going on with him or assuming that they have the answers, to sit down and not even necessarily talk to him, but to listen, to ask him how he's feeling, what's going on, and then to actually listen. It allows him to reconnect in a sense, because he's finally got a group of people actually that are willing to listen and hear him out and accept him as he is. It's like, you know, the more he moves through life, everyone in the book has their own, little by little, like their own secrets, their own little things that they keep to themselves, lies that they tell other people. And so with that, you see this kind of hypocrisy with them sitting in judgment of Vivek. Like, they might not necessarily do the same things that he does, specifically that they might not be homosexual, but they've all got their own little individual ways of living that other people might take issue with, right? That other people might judge them for. And so some of the very same people that sit in judgment of him, it's like they aren't doing much better in their own lives. They really don't have any room to speak. There are some things that take place within the book, not so much with Vivek being gay or with regards to Vivek being gay, but rather like some exchanges that he has with other people that struck me as being weird. Nowadays, it's not done in Western culture, right? Or West Indian culture as well. And so it shocked me because it was weird. There are some things that take place in the book that struck me as being weird, because it's like, at least nowadays, not done in American culture, as far as I know, and or West Indian culture as well. So it shocked me because it's not really done, right? The people surrounding Vivek, like his friends of his age group, the girls that he becomes friends with, his cousins, they don't seem to really take issue with it, right? Like, I understand them being accepting of him possibly being gay. Like, that's not the problem. But rather, he enters into a relationship with someone that really caught me off guard, because it seemed a bit inappropriate. And I was kind of thrown off, because for everyone else, it didn't seem to be a big deal. You know, I wasn't sure if this was like a regular cultural practice in Nigerian culture, but, you know, in looking it up, it seems like something that, where it's like one of those things that what's publicly done versus what's privately accepted might not necessarily be the same thing, you know? And as well, throughout the book, you have this thing of everyone having secrets. But within Vivek's friend group with these young ladies, they're so accepting of each other and trusting of each other that they essentially tell each other things that they wouldn't tell anyone else, right? Like their parents and other people included. So I didn't really know how to read that situation. Maybe it was a matter of their friendships Vivek's friendship with these girls, them being so close and knowing each other since childhood, where they could be honest with each other, that they could literally tell each other anything and not fear the other person judging them for it. Knowing that the other person would accept them regardless of whatever it is that they happen to be doing. On the one hand, I get that. I think it's cool to have friends of that nature where you're genuinely friends and you don't have to worry that if you tell them something today and you have an argument or disagreement tomorrow, they're not going to bring it up then, and, they're not going to whisper behind your back about it. They're able to have truly genuine friendships where they could be their full authentic selves with each other. But I don't want to give it away, but it's like, if you read the book, you'll get what I'm referring to. It's a bit of an unexpected turn of events within the book, right? So throughout the book, there's this thing of, especially between the generations, so Vivek, his cousin, their friends versus their parents. The parents keep secrets from themselves, which largely falls along the lines of infidelity, things of that nature. Really situations where it's like, they're lacking communication, selfishness. But within Vivek's generation, him and his peer group, and his parents, you also have secrets that exist there, largely because the parents have a vision of who their children are and how they should conduct themselves. They're like these cultural expectations and things that aren't like really allowed within society, particularly with regards to gender roles and sexuality, where as the kids reach their teens and early 20s, they start questioning these things. They start dating and whatnot. They have to kind of keep this side of themselves from their parents. This results in kind of like a distance developing between the kids and their parents. Some of it comes about just through the nature of, their parents, and they don't necessarily have the kind of relationship, or rather what I should say is the kids have a far better understanding of who their parents are than the other way around. For example, one of the kids, her parents are having issues within their marriage because her father has been carrying on an affair with another woman. Not just an affair, but essentially like a whole other family. And when it comes to light, it brings problems within his relationship with his wife, as he hasn't wanted to leave the other woman, but wants to hold on to both of these women. And it's less of a thing of him, loving his first wife or loving the second wife more or less or whatever, more a thing of ownership. This is why, the other woman he's involved with, his children and such, they couldn't leave him, so despite him having this other woman, he expresses that he should be able to continue having his wife, right? Or having his wife remain in his life. In the midst of all this going on, it's like, just imagine if you and your husband are arguing about infidelity. You and your wife are arguing about your infidelity, and not just like arguing verbally, but at times you're becoming physically aggressive with your wife. And this is within the same house that you share with your child. What are the odds that your kid doesn't pick up on this, or that your child doesn't notice, that you're unhappy, that you guys aren't talking, that dad is away a lot, just that your behavior and mannerisms have changed from how things normally are. And it's this thing of, even with all of the parents, right? They don't realize that she knows what's going on, right? The parents see themselves as trying to shield her from what's happening, but don't realize that how could you not pick up on what's going on in the house? She has full knowledge of what's taking place. She's kind of had some inklings, but she finds out the full story of what's going on. And her parents remain oblivious to this. The parents don't really understand that kids, not to say that the kids know everything about their parents, but rather that they have a pretty good understanding of who they are as people, and they notice changes in behavior. Yet still, the parents feel as though they're doing such a good job of hiding themselves away, of hiding what's going on, when really it's like they're trying to hide these things from the kids, but the kids pick up on it, like they know what's going on. So it's like, while they're killing themselves trying to hide things or thinking they're getting over, the reality is that their spouses, their kids, the other people around them, like everyone else knows. But it's like with Vivek, and these other kids, they have, as they get older, they develop their own inner lives, right? And they essentially reach a point where the conversations aren't neat and tidy. There are disagreements among themselves, but they basically reach a point with each other where they can be honest about themselves. They have these messy arguments and disagreements, and they fuss and fight amongst themselves. But the point is that they're their full authentic selves with each other. And so with that, they then they don't then have to hide from each other. They don't have to lie to each other. They can be honest about who they are. And because they don't have to hide from each other, they all reach a point where it's like they can be comfortable. This, in part, allows Vivek to live and to share his full truth with his friends, to fully reveal himself to them. And as it develops, his parents can see this change in behavior in him. But because this is something they don't approve of, because this is something they don't want to see as being associated with their child, they ignore it within him. His parents are trying to figure out what's going on and him trying to understand what's going on. But they're trying this and trying that and all different methods and whatnot, thinking they have the solutions, but at no point in time do they really just sit down and try to talk to him to figure out what's going on. Not just simply asking him, hey, how are you? What are you eating? How are you feeling today? You know, what's going on with you today? They ask those questions, but those are surface level questions. They don't really listen. They don't pay attention. By the time Vivek's parents figure out what's going on with him, you know, why is he wearing his hair long? What is this depression that's brewing with him? What's going on with him? It's too late. You know, he's already passed away. And they're still clueless about what he was going through towards the end of his life, really for much of his life. And so it's like, after he passes away, they're trying to scramble to figure out what happened to him. What was it that he was dealing with? What was it that he was going through? And it's like his father is in denial about what's going on. His mom is asking questions, but it's like they're not the right questions. Everything that they need to know, all of the questions, all of the answers they're looking for are right there in front of them. But in this case, they're kind of being willfully ignorant. They're choosing to ignore or to not acknowledge what's going on. They're in denial. And it's like, because of that, Vivek picks up on this, that his parents see what they want to see. And his parents aren't at a point where they're not willing to accept what they see. And thus, they're not really willing to accept him as he is. And so because of that, because he has an idea of what his parents' reaction will be, he chooses to continue to hide away this part of himself from his parents. And so with that, because this is part of his identity, this is part of how he feels and how he views and expresses himself, how he lives his life, it's difficult for him to hide this away. And so with that, he goes where he can be himself, which is to hang out with his friends who might not necessarily get him, but they accept him. They accept him as he is. They don't try to push him to change. They don't try to push him to hide away this part of himself. They allow him to fully be who he is. They listen to him and allow him to express himself, and then they accept him for who he is. And because of that comfort, because he knows that he can be himself around them, he feels more comfortable. He comes alive around them versus being this kind of like barely living person around his parents who's just like quiet and devoid of any real feeling or emotion. He comes alive with his friends. He's full and complete person with his friends. His parents are trying to figure out what they can do to make him better, how they can help him get well. And it looks like there's really nothing they need to do. They just need to let him be. So I actually thought that the friendship that developed between him and Juju and the other girls was actually quite sweet. As for much of his life, he was an outcast. He was all alone. And then it's like within this group, he finds acceptance. He finds himself able to not just be an individual, but also to be part of this peer group. So it's like he's able to hang out with them and have a good time, enjoy himself, be free, and to just enjoy being in their company. They develop little things that, you know, they do together, like pancake day, hanging out, just like normal young adult stuff. And even with that, it's like, it's good in a way, but it's like, yet still he can only be himself within this confined space, you know, within this particular group of friends. It's like he can't be that way at home. He can't be that way out in society on the street. And so in reading this, I thought it was a really interesting book. I haven't read a lot of LGBT literature, and I tried to seek out books from other parts of the Black diaspora, not specifically focused on Nigeria, but for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of the books I end up reading that take place in Africa, like that's where it takes place. It was a pretty cool book. It offered a lot of commentary. I have very limited knowledge of Nigerian culture and the LGBT community there, But I think to some degree, it can also apply here in America and likely other parts of the Black diaspora as well, where race doesn't really factor into this here, or at least not in the sense where there's like some discussion of colorism and things along those lines, but not very much of it. I found the discussion to be quite interesting, right? Seeing the interplay between the different characters, not just Vivek and his trials and tribulations, but also the people around him. You find yourself, once you get into the story, and you can kind of tell the characters apart, especially once the kids get to be a bit older and they come back together, because they've gone off to different schools and whatnot. But once they get older and come back together, you get a real feel for their character. You get a real feel for their personalities. They feel a bit more fleshed out because the parents have less focus, right? They're not as actively raising the kids as they get older. The kids are more independent. You see more of their inner lives as well. So it's like over the course of the story, you get more development of the characters, not just in the sense of Vivek, his friends, and, them developing their relationships with their parents and whatnot, but the parents as well also have free time to themselves, and they kind of get up to their own nonsense, until it just makes for a very interesting story. A lot of the characters start out one way towards the beginning of the book, and then it's not necessarily that they change, but they kind of develop and go through different experiences over the course of the book that ends with them being in a different place. Really interesting, and highly worth checking it out. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more book recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my book review playlist.